Hello, this is Chuck Solomon, and welcome to the Candidate Experience Podcast, where we focus on the job candidate journey from apply to onboard and the space in between. Let's get started. You care about the candidate experience, but have you ever wondered exactly how to bring your company to that next level and offer a world-class experience to your candidates? It's not easy. Fortunately, Candidate.fyi can help. Their solution guides candidates through your hiring journey, enhancing transparency and communication at every touch point. You'll also gain valuable insights on what's working and what's not with your hiring process. Best of all, it integrates directly with your ATS. Head on over to Candidate.fyi and see how to transform your company's candidate experience today. You're about to hear some great insights from Brian Ellis in this behind the scenes episode. Hello, this is Chuck Solomon, and welcome to the Candidate Experience Podcast. Today in this episode, we have Brian Ellis. Brian is the manager of talent attraction and employer brand at Align Technology. Other than stumbling through that, Brian, did I get your title and everything right?
Yes, that's correct.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me today.
Absolutely, Chuck. Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Likewise. Can you tell people a little bit about Align? I think they probably know your product, but they probably don't know the name of the company. And I'm going to share a story about a conversation I had with a dentist last week about you guys as well.
Oh, interesting. I look forward to hearing that. But Chuck, you're exactly right. So Align is a company that is not maybe as well known as the product that we make. And the product that we make is Invisalign, which is a clear aligner for orthodontics. Most people have probably heard of Invisalign. And then we also have another product, which is the iTero oral scanner, which is used by a lot of orthodontists and dentists as well.
Gotcha. Thanks for explaining that. I took my middle schooler to a dental appointment on, I think, Friday this past week. And I don't know how we got on the topic of this. Oh, actually, my middle schooler needs your product. And I mentioned to our dentist that you were local, that you were in the Research Triangle Park, and my dentist did not know. So I said, yep, they're right around the corner. Another thing that I heard, I actually talked to a candidate who's applied for you with you guys and actually had a really positive candidate experience. So I wanted to share that with you and you can share that with your team as well. But they gave you good thumbs up, and they actually, you tell me if this is correct there, but they told me that you guys have more 3D printers than any other business in the country, or tell me about that. How many 3D printers do you guys have?
Yeah, Align is a leader in 3D printing. So we 3D print the aligners, which are custom designed for every patient. So there's a huge operation that does the 3D printing, and it's really cool to see. There's some videos online about it, actually, even on our corporate website. I believe you can access from there, or definitely on our career site if you check that out, which is aligntech.com/careers. So would definitely encourage people to go just watch that process. It's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, awesome. I'm definitely going to check that out. Another quick question before we get into the real questions here do you offer some sort of free products to your employees or a discount, or is that a benefit for you guys?
It is a benefit, yes. It varies around the world a little bit, but it is a benefit that we offer to our employees, and length of time with the company kind of varies from country to country. So if we have a global audience here, then that's awesome, first of all, and second of all, it could vary in your country, but in the U.S., there is a benefit for employees, and it's usually starting after 90 days, and there's some, a lot of some fine print that goes with that, but it's a very cool thing. We have a lot of employees here in the Raleigh office who have who've gone through treatment, I think, and so yeah, absolutely something that people would want to ask more about and keep in mind.
Yeah, I think that's one of those unique benefits that only you guys can offer. So I'm glad to hear that. All right, awesome. So in the Candidate Experience podcast, we talk with subject matter experts like yourself on sort of really how do we improve this? It's 2019. I just learned that unemployment has the February numbers came out and it dropped from 4% down to 3.8%. So it's getting even more challenging and such. So my question for you, Brian, is in a perfect world, how would you envision or describe a stellar candidate experience?
It's a great question, Chuck. I think it's one that people in this space spend a lot of time on, really thinking about and even dreaming about in some ways. If we're the candidate, how would we want this to work for us? And so as I get into this, I'll say, even for me and for us, I think right now, some of this is aspirational, and it varies from company to company. But if I was going to use a couple of words to describe that candidate experience, I would use first the word personalized. I think things are getting more and more personalized in every area of marketing, and certainly candidate experience when you're thinking about a new position is no different there.
I agree. Totally agree.
And the second word, which I think we'll talk a little bit more about later, but is authentic. So making sure that people can make a good decision, and that means in some cases that the company is a great fit for them, and maybe in other cases it means that they're able to discover that the company is not a good fit for them. But that, in my mind, is still a successful candidate experience because people have been able to get a realistic idea of could they see themselves there, and is that a win? Is that a fit for them? We want, obviously, the situations that we're looking for from a recruiting standpoint are win-wins. And so if it's not a win for the candidate, we want them to be able to make that decision. Obviously, we're trying to do the same thing going through the process.
Awesome. Sounds great. Thanks for sharing that. I wish, I wish my goal here is hoping that more and more companies, try to dream a little bit, like you had mentioned, that they really, think big. There's a lot of things I think can be done that doesn't require a huge budget. And I think it's about time that this happens, I think, in the market.
It's true, Chuck. And I think there's so many things that, like you said, don't require huge budgets. Some of the personalization things, especially when you get to the stage of the process where you have a candidate on site, they're just things that you can do to make them feel welcome. Very small, tokens of appreciation, communication. So much of that goes a really long way. And I think as you look at the market and what you're hearing from candidates over and over again is, I think where we collectively, not even here at this company, but where we collectively in this space fail is where we miss those opportunities and where candidates feel like it's not a personal process, like they're not getting the communication that they need or want from teams and those kinds of things. And so I think we'll talk maybe in a little bit too about the reason for some of that. But I think, at the end of the day, a lot of the things that we're hearing about what could be improved tend to be the same types of things. And so when we're looking at ways that we could perfect or make this process better for candidates, it really, I think, there's so many different things you could do, so many different ways you could personalize, but a lot of it does come back to that personalization and authenticity.
Totally agree. Thanks. One of the things, I'm not sure if I shared this with you before, but I'll share it with you now, is that one of the things that precipitated me wanting to actually start this podcast is that in the work that I do, I hear, from candidates a lot about sort of the bad, the bad and the ugly of the candidate experience. So I sort of wanted to sort of shine some light on that. And this past week is no exception. I heard from a job candidate that is in the process of interviewing with a well-known Fortune 500 company. not naming names at all here, but they expressed their. They said they had been through, I believe, 8 interviews thus far, and there are still 2 to 4 additional interviews to come. And I asked them, I queried them and said, "Is the number of interviews too much?" And they didn't really say that the number of interviews was too much. Their issue was mainly that the fact that this has been going on for more than 2 months, and that there doesn't seem to be any end in sight, nor any process or time frame, or sort of, this is what the candidate journey is going to look like. They'd be okay with, yeah, I'm going to have 15 interviews, but it's going to take place over this period of time, and here's sort of the journey there. And consequently, this Fortune 500 company is likely going to lose out on this candidate because they're just not interested. That they had great interest at the beginning, but now they said, not sure why this should take this long, and why they'd lost interest. So I'm not sure what we can do about that here in this conversation there. But I just wanted to share that the reason the reason I had for wanting to do this show is really to sort of talk about this and shed some light on that. But can you let job seekers know what might be going on behind the scenes, sort of after they hit that apply button, and perhaps what things mean, or tell us, sort of like, pull back the sheets a little bit and let's see, can you describe what's going on?
Absolutely. And I'll say as well, too, like, I want to look at this in a couple of ways. One, from the candidate perspective, and 2, from the company perspective, right? So having kind of been on both sides of the fence, it's easy as a candidate, I think, to get really frustrated with some of what's happening behind the scenes because you don't see it, you don't understand it. From the company perspective, sometimes there are very clear reasons for doing what you're doing the way you're doing it, but it's not clear, not transparent to the candidate why that's happening.
Sure.
So I think that actually ties in really well with the story that you just told about the Fortune 500 company, right? Because you're telling from the candidate's perspective what they're seeing and experiencing. And while there may be some valid logical reasons why it's taking more time on the company side, or in some cases why it may take a few more interviews, although that sounds like a lot.
I agree. I agree.
Sounds like the big gap there, though, is communication, right? The candidate doesn't understand. They haven't been given the why. And I think that's kind of one of the things that if you can bridge that gap where the candidate understands and it's logical to them, that even if it's not what they want, even if it doesn't quite make sense to them, they understand we had a budget hold, or that we have some other candidates that we're talking to. That's just a reality sometimes, right? So, but backing up a little bit, just looking at it, it could be, and I want to look at this from the candidate perspective first, right? Because we're talking about candidate experience, and hopefully we'll have some candidates who are listening to this, and some of them really might be very frustrated about their experiences with different companies if they haven't had a good explanation of the process. So there's a wide spectrum here. It could be a range of things from a small company to a large company, but starting at the small company end of that range, and I've been at both ends of that spectrum, right? So I kind of know or have experienced some of the good and the bad at both sides, on both sides of this. But a smaller company, a lot of times those companies maybe or maybe do not have a dedicated HR person, and so hiring could be something that has either fallen on someone's plate who's managing payroll, or a manager who just is told, hey, hire somebody, but this is in addition to your regular day job. And probably the reason that they need to hire somebody is because they're already maxed out, right? So hiring is something that should be their top priority, but in many cases it's just not. So that doesn't mean that it's a bad opportunity or that it's a bad company. It might mean they have a really big need, which, as you're looking for a job, then that's good to know. And it may be also something that has you asking more questions about what's your normal process like when you're working with candidates, or really trying to learn more about the value that company puts on their employees and what it would be like to work there. So I think that experience helps inform your journey as a candidate to really explore, is this the right company for me? And that's, again, kind of looking at the smaller company side of it and looking at it from the candidate perspective. So you may be experiencing something like slow response times, no responses in some cases, and in a lot of cases it's because people are just already redlined, and this is something, the 10th or 12th thing that's gotten piled on their plate this week. And that's not making excuses for them, but that's just the reality of the situation sometimes. And I think even if that's not pleasant, it's helpful to understand that that might be what's happening. So that's that side of it. On the other end of the spectrum, when you have the larger companies, then in those cases, you may be running up against some processes that have been built to scale either nationally or globally and have worked for maybe years or decades at some point. And so you may be having an experience with the individual recruiter where you would think this recruiter, I've heard people use the words lazy or jerk or just have negative feelings about someone that you're working with in that process. The reality could be that they're working with them, right? You've heard some of that too.
I've heard worse than that, Brian. You're being nice.
Trying to be diplomatic, but I mean, we've all heard these stories, right?
Sure.
About how somebody didn't get back to me, or they were too slow and missed out on an opportunity. I don't think that at the end of the day is what these companies want to be happening. But a lot of times recruiters inside these companies find themselves working within processes that they didn't invent, having to go through things that they, just are kind of the middle person for. Another one of these, again, talking about this is where you run up against budgetary issues sometimes, or timeline issues with hiring managers. They could be told from a leader, even out of their control as a hiring manager, that we need to slow roll this a little bit, and that just happens. That's part of the environment. It doesn't mean that the candidate is any less valuable, that their time is any less valuable, and hopefully the good recruiters are really taking time to emphasize that. But sometimes that doesn't happen, right? I mean, sometimes you get into situations where recruiters are dealing with, in addition to those factors, they're also dealing with extremely high workloads and extremely great amount of pressure on them to deliver results in terms of hires that are moving faster, right? So sometimes the ones that are moving a little bit slower may get moved to the back burner. Again, this isn't probably what some people want to hear about that, and I don't want it to sound like I'm making excuses for it, but that stuff happens sometimes, right? And so
Sure.
Again, I'm sharing that not from the perspective of that's okay, but more from the perspective of if that was happening to me, I don't know that I would be happy about it, but I would at least feel a little bit better if I understood some of that. Again, hopefully the recruiters can communicate this to the candidates, and that communication gap, I think, is historically, when we go back, no matter really the economic environment too, Chuck. I know you mentioned the unemployment rate, but whether times are good or bad, I think consistently we just hear that communication gap. And so, looking at it from either a personalization or a technology standpoint, I think the big challenge for us as recruiters in this space, or in the broader industry, is how can we get better at that? How can we make sure that candidates' time is valued, and that they feel that their time is valued? Another thing that I wanted to hit on really quickly, though, that's changed a lot in the last 5 or 10 years is the technology aspect of this, right? So even as recently as 5 or 10 years ago, I think you have a lot more manual and human interaction in the upfront part of this process, where at least a human set of eyes was on your application, right? Especially at some of ththese larger companies.
Sure.
And I think we're really moving into an environment now where we're seeing on the recruiting side a lot of AI solutions. Sure. Maybe starting to get, I hate to use the term machine learning, but maybe eventually starting to move a little bit into that area where recruiters and hiring managers are really starting to see, not on the smaller company side of things, but on the larger enterprise side of things, they're going to start to see the candidates that technology is recommending to them first. And so as a candidate, I think I took the time to fill out an application, which is that's probably a whole separate podcast, right? But I took the time to fill out an application. We'll do that in the future. Right.
We'll do that one in the future.
Absolutely. Keep it short. That's my tip of the day. But, I took the time to fill out an application here, and nobody has called me back, right? I got an automated response. And so a lot of times, even in a high employment situation like we're in now, I've seen, even in the last few months, single recs that may have hundreds of applicants on them, where it's just not possible for a recruiter in that high volume, high rec load environment to call every single applicant or even send a personal email. So is there a way we could even personalize the technology more, though, and help people feel appreciated and tie them into a network where maybe they're not the top candidate for that role, but we start to develop a relationship where they become more familiar with the company and more open to conversations about roles that may be a better fit in the future and that sort of thing. So I know that's a long answer to your question, but there's a lot that goes into it. And it's something that I think can be really valuable for candidates to understand, even on the negative side a little bit. And then also, I think it's something that companies should be looking at every day to see how we can make it better.
Totally agree. When you said that you had applied, did you do that through Align, like as a mystery shopper, for instance, or were you just applying somewhere else just to see the process?
I go through our own process for sure,
okay.
and kind of see. And one of the things that we have specifically been really committed to is trying to keep the application process short. So we'd love for that to happen in ideally under a minute. People could go through under 2 minutes for sure. There are going to be some things, I think, as we move into regulatory environments that necessarily lengthen that process just a little bit. If you're looking especially from a global perspective at things like GDPR in Europe, and there are also similar privacy laws now in China and Russia. And, I wouldn't be surprised if we started to see that sort of thing here in the U.S. and North America as well. So there are going to be things like that in terms of data consent that you have to add. But if there are things you don't have to add, or if there's a way even to scrape resume for information so the candidate's not having to enter it, or especially not having to enter things twice, then obviously you want to stay, the shorter the better in those cases.
I totally agree. So, I like the fact that you go in and check in your own processes just to see from the candidate's perspective. I think that's great. And I would encourage, all talent acquisition managers to do the same just to see what it actually looks like. And I hope you finally get a call back on your resume submission. So
well, it's a funny story about that, Chuck. I did actually go through and do this just when I was testing some things a couple months ago, and one of our recruiters on the team here in Raleigh came over to me and they said, Brian, are you really interested in this role? And I was like, no, I'm just kidding. I was just testing it.
Well, it's a good warning to all everyone on your TA team to go ahead and say, yeah, beware, because you never know who's going to be applying here. So
that's right.
So you actually used your real name, so they knew who it was. So.
They knew who it was, yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you. You had touched on this earlier, sort of about values and such, but I was hoping that you could perhaps you talk a little bit about what values are important for your employer brand and for the candidate experience at Align.
Absolutely. One of the biggest things that we, just a little history, I guess, before this, we started really around doing some employer brand initiatives probably mid-2017. So I shared a little bit about what the company does, but in terms of the company growth, it's just been absolutely phenomenal over the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So we, I think if you look back at the numbers into 2014 or so, the company had about 3,600 employees and over 10,000 today. So just the growth in that period of time has been
significant.
Really rapid. Yeah, really significant and really rapid. Quite a hyper growth environment during that window of time. And so what was happening as a result of that, in that kind of in the middle of that space, and it related to employer branding, but it related to a lot of other things as well. And we're pretty open and transparent about this with candidates as we talk about this also. But there was a big hiring need, and there wasn't really there wasn't really a strong brand in the market. We really didn't have a lot out there about what it meant to work for Align. And as you mentioned before, a lot of people, especially in the North American market, would be familiar with our product. But we all have also some restraints in terms of the way we can talk about the product with our employer branding on that side of it as well, due to FDA regulations and clinical versus non-clinical employees and things like that. So we in some ways were starting from scratch with Align as an employer brand versus the well-known product. So we had the opportunity to really kind of decide at that point in time. We know we need to do something, but what do we want this to look like? And one of the really foundational values back when we started doing that, no matter what we did, was the authenticity of the experience. And that doesn't mean that everything we do, everyone's going to have that experience. So I want to say that first, but we did want to capture real stories of real employees that they themselves were living this experience, right? We weren't making stuff up. We're not using stock photography. We're not using stock video. If you look at the things that we're doing on LinkedIn and our career site. So these are actual employees who've had the experiences that they talk about. And that started off kind of going around the world. And we did a short video clip series, which you can still see some of these out there, but just asking people questions and letting them respond in about 30 seconds about what's your experience been like here. We've done some day in the life articles, some leadership articles from some of our leaders. But again, all of that's been done internally in terms of, working with employees and really capturing their stories. Not necessarily the filming and all of that's been done in-house. We've used some strategic partners to help us with some of those things. But in terms of the actual people that are featured and the people that are kind of pulling all the stories together and all that, we really want to make sure that people can get an idea of someone's story who works here, someone who's experienced this, and what it may be like to work in a North America environment versus a APAC environment or an EMEA environment. So we've tried to be really purposefully global as well with the representation that we have in these pieces. And it's been, I'll say, Chuck, it's been a lot of fun. Gotten to know a lot of people really well, and we have a review process internally before we publish things. And some of the people in our review process are telling me, they're like, you guys are lucky. Like some of the things they're reviewing are, I guess, not quite as exciting, but part of this process, I think, for us, in keeping with that value of authenticity, has necessarily meant that we've really had the opportunity to go and explore and hear people's stories. And so I'll say, kind of coming out of that I feel really blessed and really fortunate that we've had the opportunity to do it, and certainly wouldn't have done it any other way.
Awesome. I'd love to hear authentic stories. Love to see images on a career site that are not stock images, but actual images of actual staff. That's awesome. Well, thank you, Brian. I appreciate your time here. If people want to get in touch with you or, learn about what jobs you're currently recruiting for, how would they do that?
Absolutely. Well, check out our career site for opportunities right now with Align. It's aligntech.com/careers. Or just to learn more about Life at Align, you can also follow the hashtag Life at Align on LinkedIn. And to get in touch with me if you have questions, feel free to look me up on LinkedIn as well. It's Brian Ellis, BRIAN, and you can just type Align after that and it should come right up. So I'll look forward to talking with people if they have an interest to explore these things more.
Brian, thanks for your time today, and thanks for your insights. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chuck. It's been a pleasure to talk with you, and I appreciate the opportunity. Best of luck with the podcast.
Thanks so much, Brian. Thanks for listening to the Candidate Experience Podcast. You can reach out to us via our website, thecx.xyz. That's thecx.xyz.